The sky above Prime was on fire. High Counselor stood at the observation window of the orbital command station and watched the world below burn. Orange and red flames spread across the great forests of the southern continent. Black smoke rose from the ancient cities that had stood for 10,000 years. There was dying, and there was nothing could do to stop it. The Dominion had come 3 days ago. They arrived without warning, without mercy, and without any interest in negotiation. They were not like other species in the galaxy. They did not want territory or resources or political power. They wanted only one thing: to consume. They were a swarm species, billions of creatures sharing one hive mind, and they moved across the stars like a plague of insects. Every civilization they encountered, they devoured. Every planet they touched, they stripped bare. Now they had come for the... Turned away from the window. The command center was full of officers and technicians, all of them working desperately at their stations. Their four-fingered hands moved across control panels. Their large, dark eyes reflected the glow of warning lights that flashed red across every screen. The air smelled of fear and exhaustion. "Report," said. The High Counselor's voice was calm, but inside felt nothing but cold despair. Fleet Commander approached. He was young for his position, only 200 years old, but the last 3 days had aged him. His gray skin had lost its healthy shine. His movements were slow and heavy. "We have lost another 12 ships in the last hour," said. "The 3rd Defense Fleet is gone. The 4th is down to 6 vessels. We have perhaps 40 warships remaining across all sectors." Closed all 4 eyes for a moment. 40 ships. They had started with over 300. And our estimates suggest they still have more than 9,000 combat vessels, possibly more. They continue to receive reinforcements through their jump points. 9,000 against 40, the mathematics of extinction. "What about the evacuation?" asked. His expression grew even darker. 17 transport ships have launched successfully. They carry approximately 12 million civilians, but they are moving to intercept. Our remaining fleet is attempting to form a defensive line, but... He stopped. He did not need to finish. Understood. The defensive line would not hold. The transports would be caught. 12 million would die in the cold darkness of space, and then they would finish consuming the... Within a week, nothing would remain of a civilization that had existed for 50,000 years. The High Counselor walked to the main tactical display. The holographic image showed the star system in terrible detail. Prime sat at the center, surrounded by a cloud of red dots representing warships. The tiny cluster of blue dots near the planet were all that remained of the fleet. Further out, 17 green dots moved slowly toward the edge of the system. The evacuation transports. They were moving as fast as they could, but they were slow ships designed to carry passengers, not to run from predators. A swarm of red dots was already changing course to chase them. "How long until they reach the transports?" asked. "At current speeds, approximately 4 hours. 4 hours. 12 million lives had 4 hours left." Stared at the display for a long moment. Around the command center, officers continued their work, but many of them were crying silently. Some were sending final messages to loved ones. Others simply sat frozen at their stations, unable to process what was happening. This was the end, the absolute end. Unless... Turned to the communications officer, a young female named. "Open a channel, all frequencies, maximum power broadcast." Looked up with confusion. All frequencies, that would include the restricted channels, the human channels. "Yes." The room went quiet. Officers stopped their work and stared at the High Counselor. The humans, that young species from the small blue planet on the far side of the galaxy. They had encountered them 60 years ago, when humanity first developed faster-than-light travel and began exploring the stars. The Galactic Council had debated for years about whether to accept humans as members of the interstellar community. They had voted against them twice. Remembered the arguments well. Humans were too violent. Their history was filled with war and destruction. They had nearly destroyed their own planet before learning to work together. They were unpredictable, emotional, and dangerous. They built weapons that made other species uncomfortable. They solved problems with force when diplomacy was still an option. "They are not civilized," had said in the council chamber. "They are children playing with fire. We cannot allow them into our community until they learn to control their impulses." That had been 30 years ago. Since then, the humans had been isolated, kept at the edges of galactic society, watched with suspicion and fear. And now was going to beg them for help. "Do it," the High Counselor said. "Open the channel." Hesitated for only a moment, then activated the communication system. A soft tone indicated that the broadcast was live. Stepped forward. The words did not come easily. Pride was a hard thing to swallow, but extinction was harder. "This is High Counselor of the people. We are broadcasting on all frequencies to any ships or stations that can hear us. Our is under attack by the Dominion. Our fleet is destroyed. Our cities are burning. We have 12 million civilians in evacuation transports, and they will be killed within hours." Paused. The next words tasted like ash. "We are asking for help from anyone, from everyone. We know we have not always been good neighbors. We know we have made enemies, but our children are on those transports. Our elders, our future. If there is anyone out there who can hear this message, we are begging you, please help us." The message ended, killed the broadcast. The command center was silent. Everyone waited, listening to the static of empty space. Minutes passed, no response came. Spoke quietly. "The humans are 37 light-years away. Even if they heard us, even if they wanted to help, they could not reach us in time. Their fastest ships would take days to arrive." Knew this. The call for help was symbolic, nothing more. A final gesture before the end. On the tactical display, the swarm continued its advance. The red dots moved closer to the green dots. The countdown to extinction continued. Returned to the observation window and looked down at the burning world below. Somewhere down there, in the ruins of the great cities, were still fighting, still hopping, still believing that somehow something might save them. But hope was a lie. The universe was cold and empty and uncaring. No one was coming. The High Counselor stood alone and waited for the end. 37 light-years away, the message arrived. Admiral Park was in her quarters aboard the Earth Unified Fleet Command Station when her personal terminal lit up with an urgent alert. She had been reading a book, an old paper book that she carried with her everywhere. It was a collection of poetry from old Earth, printed 200 years ago. The pages were yellow and fragile, but she loved the smell of them and the weight of them in her hands. She set the book aside and touched the terminal screen. The message played. A voice she did not recognize, speaking in a language she did not understand, but the automatic translator converted it to Korean in real time. She listened to every word. She listened to the fear. She listened to the desperation. She listened to the pride breaking apart in the voice of someone who had never begged for anything in their life. When the message ended, sat very still. She knew them well, though she had never met one in person. Every officer in the Earth fleet knew They were the ones who had called humanity dangerous. They were the ones who had blocked Earth's admission to the Galactic Council. They were the ones who had warned the other species that humans could not be trusted. And now they were dying, and they were asking for help. Stood up and walked to the window of her quarters. Outside, the stars burned in the endless darkness. Somewhere out there, impossibly far away, 12 million people were running for their lives. She pressed the communication button on her desk. "Commander, report to my quarters immediately." 3 minutes later, the door opened and walked in. He was her executive officer, a man of 35 with sharp eyes and a calm voice. He had served under her for 6 years, through 2 border conflicts and 1 full-scale war. She trusted him more than anyone else in the fleet. Admiral, he said, standing at attention, I received the same transmission. The entire station is talking about it. What are they saying? Hesitated. Mixed opinions. Some feel sympathy for others remember how they treated us. There are those who say we should help, and there are those who say we should let them suffer the consequences of their arrogance. Nodded slowly. She had expected as much. Humans had long memories and the insults still burned. What do you think, Commander? Was quiet for a moment. He walked to the window and stood beside her, looking out at the stars. I think, he said carefully, that we have spent 60 years trying to prove we are not the monsters they said we were. If we ignore this call, we prove nothing. If we answer it, we prove everything. Smiled. It was a small smile, tired and sad. That is a very diplomatic answer. It is also the truth, Admiral. She turned away from the window and picked up her book of poetry. She opened it to a page near the middle and read a few lines silently. My grandmother survived the Pacific War, she said. The old war before we went to the stars. She used to tell me stories about the bombs that fell on her city, about the fires, about the screaming. She said the worst part was not the dying. The worst part was knowing that no one was coming to help, that feeling of being completely alone in the universe. She closed the book. I will not let 12 million people feel that way, not if I can do something about it. Turned to face her. Admiral, the system is 37 light years away. Our fastest cruisers can make that distance in 3 days. By then, they will have finished their work. Our cruisers, yes, but not everything in our fleet. His expression changed. His eyes widened with understanding and something that might have been fear. Admiral, you cannot mean. Wake the commander. The word hung in the air between them like a ghost. There was humanity's greatest secret. It was an Apex-class Dreadnought, the first and only ship of its kind. It had taken 20 years and the combined resources of every nation on Earth to build. It was 4 kilometers long, armed with weapons that could crack a planet's crust, and powered by an engine that could bend space itself. It had never been used in combat. It existed only as a deterrent, a warning to any species that might think humanity was weak. The other species in the galaxy knew they existed. They had seen images of it during the unveiling ceremony 10 years ago, but they had never seen it move. They had never seen it fight. Some of them doubted it was even real. They can reach the system in 4 hours using its drive, said. That gives us time to stop them before they reach the evacuation transports. Admiral, High Command has not authorized this action. It requires approval from the United Earth Council. The political implications. I am aware of the political implications, Commander. His voice was hard now, the voice of a woman who had made her decision. I am also aware that while we wait for politicians to debate, 12 million people will die. Children, families, an entire civilization. She walked to her desk and began pulling up fleet deployment orders on her terminal. The council can court-martial me when this is over. They can strip my rank and throw me in prison. I will accept whatever punishment they decide. But I will not stand here and do nothing while innocent people are slaughtered. Watched her for a long moment, then slowly he nodded. What are your orders, Admiral? Looked up at him. Her eyes were bright and fierce. Signal all ships in the sector. Anyone who wants to volunteer for this mission should report to this escort formation within 2 hours. This is not an order. This is a choice. I will not force anyone to risk their life for a species that hates us. She paused. And wake the crew of the. Tell Captain Lee that his ship is finally going to war. Saluted, yes, Admiral. He turned and walked toward the door. Before he reached it, spoke again. Commander. He stopped and looked back. Thank you, she said, for not trying to talk me out of this. Smiled. It was the first real smile she had seen on his face in months. Admiral, I have served with you for 6 years. I learned a long time ago that arguing with you is pointless. And besides, he paused at the door. Someone has to show the galaxy what humanity really is. Might as well be us. The door closed behind him. Stood alone in her quarters, looking at the stars. Somewhere out there, they were waiting for a miracle they did not believe in. She intended to deliver one. The swarm moved through space like a river of death. Supreme Swarm Commander 9 observed the battle through 10,000 eyes. Every ship in the fleet was an extension of its mind. Every drone, every soldier, every weapon was a part of its body. The hive mind stretched across the star system, feeling everything, controlling everything. Victory was certain. They had fought harder than expected, but it did not matter. Their fleet was broken. Their world was burning. Their pathetic evacuation transports were running toward the edge of the system like frightened animals. 9 tasted their fear. It was delicious. The swarm had consumed 17 civilizations in the last 1,000 years. Each one had believed itself special. Each one had believed it would survive. They were all wrong. They were the ultimate predators of the galaxy. They did not negotiate. They did not show mercy. They simply consumed and moved on to the next prey. The would be the 18th. On the bridge of the flagship's Grace, High Counselor watched the tactical display and waited for death. The ship was badly damaged. Fires burned in 3 sections. The main weapons were offline. Life support was failing. Around, the bridge crew continued their work, but their movements were slow and hopeless. They had fought for 3 days without sleep. They had watched their friends die. They had sent their final messages to loved ones they would never see again. A young officer named sat at the communication station. Tears ran down his gray face, but his voice was steady. High Counselor, the advance fleet will reach our position in 20 minutes. The main swarm will reach the evacuation transports in approximately 3 hours. Nodded, 20 minutes. That was how much time remained for this Grace and its crew. 3 hours was how much time remained for the species. Any response to our distress call? Asked, knowing the answer. Nothing, High Counselor. All channels are silent. Of course they were. The galaxy was full of species who talked about peace and cooperation, but none of them would risk their own safety for others. They had learned this lesson too late. In the end, everyone was alone. Closed 4 eyes and prepared for the final battle. The remaining ships would fight to the last. They would die with honor. Perhaps someday someone would remember them. And then the sensors screamed. Every screen on the bridge flashed with warning lights. Every alarm in the ship activated at once. Officers shouted in confusion and fear. "What is happening?" demanded. Stared at his display with wide eyes. I do not understand. There is a massive energy reading behind our defensive line. Something is opening in space itself. Rushed to the main viewport and looked out into the darkness. At first there was nothing, just stars and the distant shapes of warships. But then the stars began to twist. The darkness itself began to tear. A line of pure white light appeared in the void, growing longer and wider with every second. It was a wound in reality, a hole in the fabric of space. The tear grew until it was nearly 2 kilometers wide. Light poured from it, so bright that had to look away. And then something came through. It was a ship, but calling it a ship was like calling a mountain a rock. It was massive beyond comprehension. 4 kilometers of black metal and angular lines and weapons that bristled from every surface. It moved through the tear in space with terrible slowness, emerging into the system like a monster rising from the deep ocean. Running lights pulsed along its hull in a steady rhythm, blue and white lights like a heartbeat. The bridge of this Grace was silent. No one moved. No one spoke. They simply stared at the impossible thing that had appeared before them. "What is that?" someone whispered. His hands shook as he checked his readings. It is transmitting an identification signal. The language it is human. The ship is human. Human, the word seemed impossible. The humans were 37 light-years away. They could not be here. It was not possible. But the ship was real. It was here. And it was the largest vessel anyone in the fleet had ever seen. A voice came through the communication system. It was calm and steady, translated into language by automatic systems. The voice belonged to a woman. "This is Admiral Park of the Earth Unified Fleet Dreadnought. We received your distress call. We are here to help." Felt something strange in the center of their chest. It took a moment to recognize the feeling. It was hope, real hope for the first time in 3 days. Admiral Park said, finding their voice. "They have thousands of ships. Your vessel is impressive, but one ship cannot." "High Counselor," the Admiral interrupted gently, "I appreciate your concern, but please understand something. This is not a rescue mission. This is a statement." Before could respond, the reacted. 9 had observed the human ship's arrival with curiosity. A single vessel, no matter how large, was not a threat to the swarm. The hive mind ordered 300 warships to break formation and intercept the newcomer. They would destroy it quickly and then continue the hunt. The 300 ships accelerated toward the weapons charging. On the bridge of the human dreadnought, Admiral Park sat in the command chair and watched the approaching enemy. Around her, officers worked at their stations with calm efficiency. There was no panic, no fear, only focus. Commander stood beside her. "Admiral, 300 vessels approaching. They will be in weapons range in 4 minutes." Nodded, "Signal all stations. Prepare for combat." Relayed the orders. Throughout the massive ship, thousands of crew members moved to battle positions. Weapons systems powered up. Shield generators hummed with energy. The prepared itself for war. In the Weapons Control Center, Lieutenant sat at the primary targeting console. She was 28 years old, with steady hands and cold eyes. She had trained for this moment her entire career. Her finger hovered over the firing control. "Primary cannon ready, Admiral," she reported. "Awaiting your order." Looked at the tactical display. 300 enemy ships, thousands more behind them. A swarm that had destroyed 17 civilizations. She smiled. "Lieutenant," she said calmly, "weapons free. Show them what happens when they threaten people under our protection." Press the button. And the void lit up with the light of human fury. The main cannon of the fired. It was not like any weapon the galaxy had ever seen. A beam of concentrated energy shot forward from the spine of the dreadnought, traveling at 12% of the speed of light. It crossed the distance between thee and the approaching fleet in less than a second. The beam struck the lead warship and passed through it like sunlight through glass. The ship did not explode. It simply ceased to exist. One moment it was there, and the next moment it was atoms scattered across empty space. But the beam did not stop. It continued forward, hitting the ship behind the first one, then the ship behind that one, then another, and another. 17 warships died in that single shot. On the bridge of the, Lieutenant watched her targeting display with professional satisfaction. 17 confirmed kills, she reported. Recharging primary cannon, secondary batteries engaging. Along the sides of the dreadnought, dozens of smaller weapons opened fire. Missiles launched from hidden bays. Energy cannons pulsed with blue light. Point defense guns created a web of destruction around the ship. The 300 vessel that had been sent to destroy the found themselves flying into a storm. 9, the Supreme Swarm Commander, felt something it had not experienced in 1,000 years. Confusion. The hive mind tried to process what was happening, but the data made no sense. Ships were dying faster than 9 could count them. Weapons that should have damaged the human ship were bouncing off its shields like rain off a mountain. The swarm pressed forward anyway. They did not know fear, they only knew hunger. It did not help them. On the flagship, High Counselor watched the battle with 4 eyes wide open. The tactical display showed the human ship moving through the formation like a predator through a school of fish. Everywhere it went, enemy vessels died. Red dots disappeared from the screen faster than could track. "This is not possible," whispered Fleet Commander. "No single ship can do this." But it was happening, right in front of them. The impossible was becoming real. The pushed forward, positioning itself between the swarm and the evacuation transports. Its shields absorbed hundreds of enemy weapons. Its hull took hits that would have destroyed any other vessel. It did not slow down. It did not stop firing. In the engineering section of the Dreadnought, Chief Engineer worked with frantic speed. Sweat poured down his face as he directed his team to manage power distribution across the ship's systems. "Increase power to forward shields by 15%, he ordered. "Redirect reserve power from the secondary engines to the main weapon array." Beside him, young Ensign monitored the shield harmonics. She was only 22 years old, fresh out of the academy, and this was her first real combat experience. Her hands trembled slightly as she worked, but her mind was sharp and focused. "Chief, the weapons are adapting to our shield frequency," she said. "They are learning our patterns." "Then we change the patterns. Recalibrate the harmonics every 30 seconds. Keep them guessing." Nodded and got to work. Her fingers flew across the control panel, adjusting frequencies, rotating shield configurations, staying one step ahead of the enemy. In the medical bay, Dr. Shin prepared for casualties that had not yet arrived. She had converted the entire lower deck into a field hospital, with beds for both humans and any who might need treatment. Her staff moved with quiet efficiency, checking supplies and testing equipment. Was 45 years old, a veteran of 3 military campaigns. She had seen the worst that war could offer, but even she felt a strange excitement as she listened to the battle reports coming through the ship's communication system. They were winning, one ship against thousands, and they were winning. On the bridge, Admiral Park directed the battle with calm precision. She had spent 30 years preparing for this moment. Every decision, every order, every sacrifice in her career had led her to this place. "Commander's status report." Checked his display. 147 vessels destroyed. Enemy formation is breaking apart. They are beginning to retreat. Retreat? They were retreating. A swarm that had never known defeat was running away from a single human ship. Allowed herself a small smile. "Do not pursue. Maintain defensive position around the evacuation transports. Let them go." "Admiral, we could destroy more of them if we..." "We are here to save lives, Commander, not to take them unnecessarily." She looked at the tactical display, at the red dots pulling back toward the edge of the system. "The message has been delivered. They understand now." 9 pulled the swarm back. The hive mind was damaged, fragments of consciousness torn away by the loss of so many ships. The Supreme Swarm Commander felt something new, something they had not experienced in 1,000 years. Fear. The human ship was not just a weapon. It was a statement. It was proof that the galaxy held predators even greater than the... The swarm continued its retreat, leaving the system behind. On the bridge of this grace stood frozen, still trying to process what had just happened. They were leaving. The evacuation transports were safe. 12 million were going to live. Because of humans. Because of a species that they had rejected and insulted and feared. A communication came through from the... Admiral Park's voice was warm but tired. "High Counselor, the immediate threat has been neutralized. My crew will remain in your system to help coordinate the evacuation and provide any assistance you need. We have medical supplies, food, and emergency shelter materials that we can share." Tried to speak, but no words came. What could one say to the people who had just saved your entire species? Finally, the High Counselor managed a single word: "Why?" There was a pause before the Admiral responded. Because you asked, counselor, because you needed help, that is enough. The communication ended. Stood alone on the damaged bridge, looking out at the human dreadnought that hung in space like a guardian angel. Behind it, the stars shone cold and bright. The universe had just changed. Everything they believed about humanity, about the galaxy, about themselves was being rewritten in this moment, and knew that nothing would ever be the same again. 6 days after the battle, the Dominion was gone. Nine had pulled every ship, every drone, every piece of the swarm out of space. Before leaving, the Supreme Swarm Commander sent a single message on an open channel. The message was short and simple. "We will remember the humans." Admiral Park hoped they would. She hoped every species in the galaxy would remember, not because she wanted them to fear humanity, but because she wanted them to understand. They remained in orbit around Prime for 3 weeks. Its crew worked day and night alongside survivors to repair damaged ships, distribute supplies, and coordinate the massive effort of saving a dying civilization. Dr. Shin set up a medical station on the surface of the planet, in the ruins of what had once been a great city. She worked 20-hour days treating wounded, learning their biology as she went. The doctors watched her with amazement. They had never seen someone work so hard for strangers. "Why do you push yourself so much?" one of them asked her. "We are not your people." Looked up from her patient, a young child whose legs had been crushed by falling debris. She had just finished setting the bones. The child would walk again. "All people are my people," said simply. "That is what it means to be human." Chief Engineer led teams of human and technicians to repair the evacuation transports. The ships had been damaged during their escape, and many of them could not travel safely without major work. Treated every repair like a personal mission. "These ships carry families," he told his team. "Mothers and fathers, children. They trusted these ships to save their lives. We will make sure they can trust them again." Ensign spent her off-duty hours teaching children how to play human games. She showed them soccer and chess, and how to fold paper into the shapes of birds. The children followed her everywhere, their large dark eyes full of wonder at this strange creature from the stars. Commander coordinated the rescue efforts from this command center, sleeping only a few hours at a time. When Admiral Park ordered him to rest, he refused. "There is too much work to do, Admiral." "There will always be work. You cannot help anyone if you collapse." He smiled tiredly. "Then I will collapse after everyone is safe." High Counselor requested a formal meeting with Admiral Park 3 weeks after the battle. The Admiral agreed and was brought aboard the shuttle. The leader walked through the corridors of the human ship in silence. Everywhere looked, there was activity. Human crew members rushed from place to place, carrying supplies, checking systems, talking and laughing with each other. Some of them nodded respectfully to as they passed. Others smiled. They were so young, realized. Most of the crew were barely adults by standards. Children, really. Children who had traveled 37 light years to fight a battle that was not their own. Admiral Park received in her personal quarters. The room was simple and plain, with few decorations except for an old paper book on the desk and a small plant growing in a pot by the window. The Admiral stood when entered. She was shorter than had expected, a woman past her middle years with gray in her hair and lines on her face, but her eyes were sharp and bright, full of intelligence and something else. Compassion, perhaps, or understanding. "High Counselor," she said, gesturing to a chair. "Please sit. Can I offer you something to drink? I have tea if you would like to try it. It is a human custom." Sat down carefully. The chair was designed for humans and felt strange, but not uncomfortable. Tea would be acceptable. Park poured 2 cups from a ceramic pot and placed one in front of. The liquid was brown and smelled of leaves and flowers. Took a careful sip. The taste was strange but not unpleasant. "I must ask you something," said, setting down the cup. I have been thinking about it since the day you arrived, and I cannot find an answer. Why did you come? Why did you risk your ship and your crew and your career for a species that rejected you?" Admiral Park picked up her own cup and held it in both hands. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the steam rising from the tea. "Do you know the history of my species, Counselor?" "Some of it. We studied you when you first appeared in our region of space." "Then you know about our wars, the terrible things we did to each other, the weapons we built, the destruction we caused." Park's voice was soft, almost sad. "Humanity spent most of its existence at war with itself. We have done things that would horrify you, things that horrify us when we look back at our own history." She took a sip of her tea. "We carry that weight with us. Every human carries it. The knowledge of what we are capable of becoming, the memory of our own darkness." Park set down her cup and looked directly at. "But we also learned something from all that suffering. We learned that when the universe is cruel, the only answer is to be kind anyway. Not because it makes sense, not because it benefits us, but because someone has to choose to be the one who helps. Someone has to decide that mercy is more important than revenge. Someone has to show that strength is not just about destroying your enemies. It is also about protecting the innocent." She smiled, and there was something ancient in that smile, something earned through generations of pain and hard lessons. "You asked why we came. We came because you needed help. That is all. That is enough. It has to be enough." Stared at this human woman for a long time. In that moment, the High Counselor understood something that changed everything. They had called humans dangerous. They had called them violent and unstable and unfit for civilization. And they had been right. Humans were all of those things. But they were also something else. Something they had not seen. Something no species in the galaxy had understood until now. Humans were dangerous because they chose to be, and they could just as easily choose to be something else. Protectors, guardians, the ones who answer when no one else will. "The Galactic Council will hear of this," said quietly. "I will make sure of it. Everything will change." Park nodded. "Change is what humans do best, Counselor, for better or worse." Outside the window, the stars burned cold and distant. But somewhere among them, 12 million were alive. Children were playing in refugee camps. Families were rebuilding their lives. A civilization that should have died was learning to hope again. And above them all, the stood watch in the void. A mountain of black steel and human determination. A reminder to the galaxy of what one species had chosen to become. Not the monsters they could have been, but the guardians they decided to be.